Yeah. I just hi there, Ashor. Thanks very much for making time and making this possible. It's busy times for all of us, I know.
It's good to see you again, Jakkie.
Even better.
Yeah, we were worried if you were going to survive until today, you know.
I suppose I could have been replaced in short notice. I would have asked my colleague David Masanda to swap in.
I had a fright when I saw that Jakkie SMS. I'm like, oh no.
Thanks very much for joining us. It's really a pleasure to have you on this panel.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me, Jakkie.
Are you calling from Cape Town or Joburg?
William, it doesn't fit.
I am in Joburg.
Oh, there's Carol.
Hi, Jakkie. How are you?
Hi, Carol. Doing well yourself?
Good, thanks.
Everybody's so disciplined. This is normally we have to herd everybody, and so good to see.
Yeah, it's just one delay.
Yes, I've got his mobile. I'm trying to get hold of him at least.
Thank you, Judy.
And I see some blue ticks, so he'll probably respond shortly.
Jakkie?
Yes.
It would be quite good if we could have a question on the tariffs. I mean, I know it's not your scenarios, but it might be something that.
Well, Busisiwe would be the right person, I think, to probably respond to that. Well, either her or the deputy minister.
Yeah,
course,
maybe both.
Yeah, I think
or
so.
Wandile, because Wandile is
True.
He's a trade guy, you know.
Yeah.
And it does seem that the thing that is affected most is agriculture. Because the other one
is the 10% for the 10% of for BRICS, is that on top of the 30%?
No, he just said that he hasn't. It would be. That's what he said. It would be, but he hasn't imposed that yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it would be. Yeah.
What do we say with somebody like Trump?
Yeah.
All right, Jakkie.
You missed your opportunity.
Yeah. I want to jump in all at the wrong time. I just want to check with everybody. Has anybody else got presentations they'd like to share today?
Richard, I'm going to show something as normal from the platform, from the slider on the AFI platform, but that's it.
Perfect. Can we give it a quick test there, Jakkie, and make sure we are on as usual?
Let me just go to the right page. Just hang on. Can you see that?
Yep, we've got you.
Okay. I'm just going to go to the slider and show a diagram or two, because Carol, I'm not really going to speak in any great length about all the analysis we've done. I'm in a sense going to speak more political about the potential for a growth alliance, framing that as a center-left or a center-right alliance, and sort of frame that politically, and then just speak about what are the implications from a growth development perspective for let's call it a growth or a center-right alliance versus a current path, sort of center-left, slow growth trajectory. So not going to go into any of the details on the website and on the analysis on South Africa. It's just, yeah, I don't think we have time for that.
Sisiwe and Ashor and Carol and Jakkie, we will be answering questions also in the chat. You're also very welcome to answer those as they come in to make it a little bit easier for Carol at the end.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so who's going to tell me when to start?
Richard.
Richard.
I'll run through. Wandila's just joined us. I just want to get
Okay. Yeah.
Wandila set up. Morning, Wandila. This is Richard from the ISS. And then once we're happy with that, then I'll run through the full briefing.
Hi, Richard, and good morning to good morning, Jakkie. Thanks for bringing us in this, and Deputy Minister Carol, Simon, Sisbusi, and all the colleagues. Good morning.
Morning.
Morning. Thanks for joining.
We are all here. This is great news because we have 17 minutes to live and 17 minutes to launch. Just a quick briefing. I'm going to ask all the presenters that during the event today, you please keep your cameras turned on and control your own microphones. The reason for this is so that we can quickly switch between the speakers that are speaking. I will be spotlighting Carol at the start of the event so that Carol can start the event when we do go live. Carol, I will cue you on the chat function and say, go, and then you are live. I just need to make sure that the YouTube feed does actually connect, because we have had issues in the past where it just disconnected for some random reason. So once I can confirm that we are live, then I will say to you, you may begin. For the event today, we'll also be launching an online poll for our online audience. That is our evaluation poll. So that will be done during the Q&A session. And we'll encourage our online audience to complete that as best possible so we can present better events in future. Presenters, please try and keep your eyes on the camera as much as possible. It creates a personal connection with our online audience as if they were in the room, which is very useful to have. Chatham House rule does not apply because we are live streaming, so you may be quoted without your express permission. And considering it's News 24, it's most likely that you'll be quoted anyway. So do keep that in mind. Then lastly, from my side, please do keep an eye on the chat function. I know Elise and the team will be responding as well. But if you do see something that you'd like to respond to, please feel free to do so on the chat function. Carol, when it does come to Q&A, I'm happy for us to also engage the audience live with a raise hand function, but that is entirely up to you. So you can direct that and we'll adapt as we go along. TJ is my co-conspirator today, if you like. He's going to be helping me, making sure that the online audience is muted and cameras turned off so that they don't interrupt our event today. If there are any questions at this stage, please let me know. And then I'm going to start getting the technical side ready. I see Simon is also with us today so that I can share the embedding link with him for the News 24 channels as a backup.
On the questions, were we not going to do were they not going to be sent to me on WhatsApp, or how is exactly the question thing going to work?
Generally,
Edith said it was going to work, that she was going to send me the questions on WhatsApp.
Julie?
Yes, I'll come in, Richard. So Carol will address most of the questions in the chat, but if there's one or two that stand out, we'll feed it through to you on WhatsApp, and then you can address it to the panelists.
Okay, so people who are online are going to on Zoom are going to ask questions in the chat. Who can see the chat? Can everyone see the whole chat?
Yeah.
So I can't send you a message on the chat.
You can DM me.
Huh?
You can direct message.
I can direct message you, yeah, but not in the general chat. Okay. All right, so you are going to send questions on WhatsApp that you think I should address. Jakkie, are you guys going to jump in and Wandile, are you just going to jump in and answer questions in the chat, or how's it going to work?
I think we can respond online, in other words, type responses to questions in the chat. But I think it would be best if you direct, Carol. We want a free flow, but
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought
Okay,
it
so
would be
we want
better
a
if
free
you.
flow.
Carol, any that you think it fits with the mode of where you are driving the conversation, and then you
Okay.
just direct it to any of us. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, just on that, Wandile, I was thinking of having a question on the tariffs, because obviously that's what everyone's talking about now. And my understanding is that it's really just the agriculture that's affected, hey? And the wine. Is that right? Because the
It's everyone.
autos,
It's everyone.
but the autos
Is everyone,
and the steel and the raw materials are under sectoral tariffs.
Yeah. So okay, they have those sectoral tariffs, but the agriculture with the steeper one of 30%. Yeah, that is correct, because others are 25 or something like that from that time on. And I think the whole tariff points, you can raise some that are related to rural people to me, and then Usisbusi is there also to sort of like say.
Yes. Yeah, I think it would be.
I think it's important for today's conversation.
Yeah, I think people would appreciate a take on that from the two of you, especially.
Let's do that. Yeah. Sisbusi, how unjani?
Yeah, Pelunjan,
All is well. All is well. Thank you.
good to see you.
Good to see you as well.
What's going to happen? I mean, is anyone got a plan? I mean, this template that the US have spoken about, do we know what this template is going to be? Wandile, do we have any clue? I mean, what is the template? When are we going to get it? Will it replace AGOA? We know nothing.
Carol, I partially work for the government, for the presidency, and advise Lamola. I don't want to say other things he's saying there with Sisbusi and them in the coming weeks. And be L4SA. But look, I think you can ask at a peripheral level as to what will be, but broadly, the current tariffs do nullify the benefit of AGOA.
Yeah.
So we'll have to think about the path ahead.
Yeah. No, I mean, AGOA is not really the issue anymore, but I'm just wondering if the template is going to completely replace AGOA, because he wants all sub-Saharan African countries on this template that he spoke about. But guess we don't know.
We don't know. It's an evolving matter, Carol. I would say that.
Yeah. Can you just give us an answer then, sort of on the impact, the overall impact, what you think, Wandile?
Yeah, I think you can ask for our sector and what we think about some of these things, which is exactly where I was thinking that Busi will jump in also in that.
Okay.
So that's perfectly fine.
Okay, cool.
Thank you.
Cool.
All right, Carol, I'm going to show you what I'm going to share as we start. Let me just pull it up. This will be our holding slide that you'll see. So in the next nine minutes and 30 seconds, if you like. We'll ask everybody just to remain silent so that we can get the live feed running, and that's what the online audience will see as we admit the online audience. And then you can see your chat function. Is that correct, Carol?
Yep.
I'll send you a direct message there when you are ready to go. So I'm going to leave that up, and I'm also going to spotlight you for the start so that we don't have any random interruptions. And I'll let everybody know when we are ready. It's in 8 minutes' time.
Okay.
Carol? Carol?
Yes.
To quickly run through the show events, it will be the welcome and the opening by yourself. Then it will be the keynote address
Right.
by the Deputy Minister. Then we
Mhm.
will have the inset presentation from Jakkie.
Yeah.
Then afterwards, we'll have a moderated panel discussion that you will chair between all the panelists in terms of the questions that you would like to answer them. And then towards the end, we would most likely have those 20 minutes to engage the online audience.
Okay.
And there I would then strongly suggest, as we just said, that you look at the questions in the chat. You will have a good idea of what's coming through, or you can pick one or two of those and directly throw them to either Ondile or Bosiwe or to Jakkie or to any of those who would be able to answer them. And Jakkie and the rest of the panel, please also, if you see any of those questions that you would like to answer, jump in and you can answer them towards that end of the Q&A session. And then, Carol, after that, when we are approaching the end of the seminar, which would be around 12:25-ish, you can take over again with the closing remarks. And you can then, I did make a suggestion in that flow of event, if you want to answer them about that one concrete decision for reform.
No, but I've moved that to the beginning. I've moved that question.
That's perfectly fine. Yeah, no, that's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, 5 minutes to live.
This work.
All right, with 4 minutes to live, I ask all our presenters to please turn your cameras on and keep them on for the duration. A reminder to control your own microphones and try and anticipate as much as possible when somebody's coming to you so we don't have any awkward silences. And we are now 3 minutes to go. Please stand by. Yes, you may. That's perfect. Thanks for the warning. All right, stand by. We'll be going live in 45 seconds.
Okay.
Just a reminder, Carol, to keep an eye on the chat. I'll cue you as soon as I confirm that we are live.
Sure.
And 20 seconds, silence please, activating the live feed. Thank you. And good luck.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the ISS Futures event, where our task is, and the task of our speakers, is to look at how do we extract ourselves from this very low growth developmental path we're on, where we've got high structural employment, 60% of the population living in poverty, and a falling GDP per capita. Now, as a country, according to the ISS scenarios, we are poorer now than we were in 2013. And if we continue at the same rate, or even slightly stronger growth in the next decade or so, we will get back to 2013 per capita peak by 2039. So 26 lost years. The purpose of the scenarios that Jackie's going to take us through is to discuss how to avoid that fate and speed up progress. And we've got several speakers to comment on that. But before we do that, before we start, we're lucky to have the keynote speaker. That's Ashor Sarupen, the Deputy Minister of Finance, and who's one of 6 deputy ministers belonging to the DA. Well, yes, there are 6, although the one post is empty right now. And who is in the engine room of running the economy and the treasury. It's been rough, it's been rocky, but he's still there. And the tenuous GNU is holding somehow. And we are grateful for your presence here today, Ashor. So take it away, you have 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Carol. And let me start by thanking the Institute for Security Studies, the Seidel Foundation, and News 24 for hosting us this morning on this timely discussion. And it's an honor for me to share this platform at a time when the country needs clarity, honesty, and determination from all of us to deal with the low growth trap that you've described. I want to take a moment to thank the ISS for their Africa Futures report and the South Africa Futures report that they do. It always provides a good, independent, and unbiased assessment of the current conditions in our country and gives us tools as policymakers to both sharpen our analysis and assess the synergies between what we're doing and what the information market says we should be doing to stimulate stronger growth and get people out of poverty and into meaningful, decent opportunities. So I speak to you this morning not only as the Deputy Minister of Finance, but also someone who refuses to accept that decline is inevitable. And I think we need to accept that there's a sober truth in the data that Jakkie has put together at the ISS. The analysis in this report is compelling, and the future we choose is still within our grasp. We cannot continue with the status quo. Carol, as you said, if we continue as we are without decisive changes, our economy will continue to grow at a very low pace. Inequality will deepen, unemployment will become entrenched, poverty will persist, and future South Africans will inherit a state too constrained to serve them and too fragmented to change. And so the slow grinding stagnation that you've described does have a name in economics. It's called the low growth trap. It's a condition that occurs when countries become stuck in a cycle of poor productivity, low investments, weak competitiveness, and rising debt. And each of these things reinforce the other. The World Bank has warned that middle-income countries like ours risks drifting permanently into this trap without bold reforms. And as this report shows, we need to start making those reforms a reality to get onto a different path, a future where reform is executed deliberately, urgently, and strategically, where we invest in infrastructure and improve education, where we modernize our energy system, we open ourselves to trade and competition, even in light of a difficult global political environment. And above all of this can only happen if we have a capable, ethical, and responsive state. Now, this future is not automatic, and it won't arrive through speeches. It'll be earned through hard decisions, thoughtful policy and critique from external institutions like the ISS, and consistent monitoring and evaluation. And I think that starts with honesty about what has held us back. And there are many, many things. We have hollowed out institutions, corroded trust, and billions have been diverted away from investment in public services over the last 15 years. And even after commissions and court findings, we're still living with a long tail of state capture, slow procurement, acting appointments, broken infrastructure, disjointed policy in many places, and a public service often paralyzed by fear or indecision. That damage was not just financial, it was institutional. It will take many, many years to fully reverse, but we must begin and we must be relentless. So as you pointed out, Carol, correctly, the GNU is a tenuous place, but even in spite of all of the difficulties, it still has the potential to lay a foundation to bring together the various different political traditions, opposing ideological views, and try to build a center around a common agenda. And that common agenda has to be, as we read this report in detail, around getting growth moving, around delivering better to the public, and a more capable state. But we're doing so in a world that is not standing still. Geopolitical tensions, as we were reminded yesterday, are reshaping global trade and investment flows. Global economic fragmentation is increasing, economic nationalism is rising. Major economies are reassessing their supply chains, and the multilateral system is under pressure. For a middle-income, open, export-oriented economy like ours, we must be agile, competitive, and credible. We cannot assume that global capital will simply find its way here. We have to earn it, and we have to be ready to use it well. And so to realize the promise of this GNU, we must make it work through mutual respect, shared purpose, and a commitment to governing in the interests of all South Africans. And as we've seen over the last year, it's not always easy, but it is possible. And I think this report gives us a roadmap that we'll be engaging with today. It models not just where we are, but where we could be, but we must find the right levers to pull in the policy space to act. So I just want to then say that in addition to that, there have been some achievements in the GNU and some key milestones here at the Treasury, as you say, where we are at the heart of certain aspects of economic policy making. We have committed to the markets that we will stabilize debt GDP this year. We will sustain a primary budget surplus, and we will continue to maintain our investment in the social wage and infrastructure. We're balancing responsiveness and fiscal discipline in a complex and dynamic environment. And our medium-term strategy is underpinned by 4 priorities. Firstly, we are committed to maintaining macroeconomic stability by ensuring prudent fiscal management, stabilizing debt, and fostering a predictable policy environment in the fiscal policy space that anchors investor confidence. Secondly, we are working on structural reforms to remove barriers to growth, enhance competitiveness, and unlock private sector investments across key sectors of the economy. Thirdly, we are trying our best to build state capacity by strengthening our institutions, improving governance, and ensuring the effective delivery of public services to all South Africans. And later on today in the Treasury's budget debate, the Minister will speak about some reforms to the PFMA and MFMA. And finally, we will be laying the foundation for longer-term growth by prioritizing investment in public infrastructure that expands access, boosts productivity, and critically crowds in the private sector. And I think that finds some alignment between what the ISS report recommends and what we need to do in the country, at least on the Treasury side, to promote inclusive growth, maintain low and stable inflation, expand job creation and workforce integration, and enabling a just climate transition and reforming the electricity sector. But to unlock investments, we must, of course, unlock infrastructure delivery as well and ensure that our municipalities have the skills, funding, and systems to execute. And I think the scenario in this report that speaks most directly to me was the governance scenario. It shows that by strengthening institutions, fighting corruption, and improving public sector performance and restoring accountability, we can add over $50 billion to the GDP and lift millions more out of poverty. That's not abstract. That's what happens when the state works. But we must acknowledge where we've fallen short. We had an NDP that was derailed by, as I said earlier, state capture. And while it was our long-term vision, we have not had driven coordinated action. And we need to get back to some kind of central piece of policymaking, not as a slogan, but as a meaningful framework for delivery. So in my view, how can South Africa change course? Firstly, we need political will. Reform is often less about designing good policies and more about confronting the interests that block them. Whether in energy, logistics, or procurement, we need to confront the vested interests and put country before comfort. Secondly, we do need the ethical state. No policy framework will succeed if public institutions are hollowed out, if leadership positions are vacant or politicized, or if the public administration is viewed as a tool for favor instead of service. And so at a political level, we must ensure that we drive professionalism, meritocracy, and public accountability in the state. Thirdly, as I said, with what we're doing in the Treasury, we must pursue fiscal discipline with purpose. I cannot overstate this challenge. Our fiscal space is limited, but our options are not. we can reform our way into growth by investing where it counts, by improving efficiency, and by restoring trust in public finances. Fourthly, we do need the private sector. We need business to invest, because as we make them more profitable, we get national renewal. And in return, government must provide policy certainty, regulatory clarity, efficient infrastructure, and a labor market that works for both firms and the workers. And finally, we do need public trust. Citizens are tired of government plans. They want results. People want working clinics, functioning trains that run on time, a school where the teachers are on time in teaching, a job that lasts, and all of those things will give people a reason to believe again. So this report is quite important for us because, again, as I said, allows us to stress test some of our thinking and help the GNU find a chance to begin restoring some of that belief from the public. But our window to act is narrow. The world is changing fast. Global capital is mobile. South Africans are growing impatient. Climate shocks are becoming more severe. And we cannot afford another decade of dithering. We cannot wait to 2039 to get to those 2013 GDP per capita numbers. But this report reminds me that we're not locked into decline, but neither are we guaranteed progress. The outcome depends on what we do now in this term of office, in this moment. And I really hope that the GNU will not be remembered as an interlude, but that we can find the political will to make it a turning point. So from my side, we'll keep fighting for reform with ambition, govern with humility, and hopefully deliver with urgency. That's what the report tells me, that this is the South Africa we must choose and the future we must build. I thank you.
Thank you, Ashor. That was really interesting. I'm very pleased to hear about the reforms the minister is going to announce this afternoon on the PFMA and MFMA, because one of the problems with government is we've really tied ourselves up in red tape to a ridiculous extent. So I'm excited about that. And I'm also excited about your positivity for the GNU. Yeah, it's difficult, but we've got to do it. I think one of the issues is, which maybe we'll come to only right at the end, is what do you mean when you say, you know, we need the political will? Because everybody expresses the political will all the time, but somehow it doesn't materialize. Anyway, before we get there, we're going to actually look at these scenarios, and we're going to look at the options. And what these scenarios have done, Jakkie, which Jakkie has done, is he looks at sort of, if we pulled this lever, let's say the manufacturing lever, what would happen? If we pulled that lever, what would happen? And that's the point of these scenarios. So Jackie's well known to everyone here, I think. He's the founder of the ISSS, and he's the head of the African Futures Program. Now, Jakkie, you've got 15 minutes. The scenarios are spread over 20 years, I think, 2023 to 2043. And so you've got 10 minutes to take us through 20 years. See if you can do it.
Thanks, Carol. You know, we've in recent days, in recent weeks, we've had the one shock after the other. We've had the crisis in the criminal justice sector, in the SANDF and intelligence services, and we've even had the economic freedom fighters speak of evidence of an organized criminal syndicate operating at the highest level in the South African state. We've had the crisis in the government of national unity that we've spoken about a little bit, including the firing of a deputy minister, the discussions around the national dialogue around health and all these kind of stuff. And then we've recently had the challenge from Donald Trump with the 30% tariffs on South Africa from the 1st of August. And we're not sure if that accounts for the additional 10% that he wants to add for BRICS countries. We've also got the ongoing infrastructure crisis, collapse in cities like Johannesburg. So one shock after the other. But I think it is also, as Ashor reminded us, important to recognize the extent of progress. Eskom has added an additional 800 megawatt to the grid by integrating the Dupi Unit 4, 8 months ahead of schedule. We've got ongoing progress with fixing electricity supply. Home Affairs continues to impress with what it's doing on visas and identity documents. In transport, Minister Barbara Creasy has brought private sector in on rail and ports. We've got announcements by the presidency on independence of the judiciary, of course, not yet of the NPA, and that's a big issue. And then we've even got some movement on the cadastral system for the mining sector. So positives and negatives. I'm going to depart a little bit from trying to present the scenarios in any detail, because I'm going to make the argument, I think we all probably recognize, that politics will determine what happens. The essential challenge from a political perspective, as I've often said, is what happens to the urban black vote. And there have been any number of startup parties who have tried to mobilize the urban black vote, but without any great success, which means that if we politically look at the future, we probably look at the current parties, the ANC, the Democratic Alliance, MK, EFF, and so on. Although, in my view, MK is largely a temporary aberration, and I'm unsure what would happen with it given the internal turmoil in it. And we all know that the ANC is still the dominant party. It had 40.2% at the last election. The DA got 21.8%, MK about just below 15%. So when looking to the future, if we say that politics will determine, we probably have to accept that the ANC is likely to remain the largest party and remain probably at the core of government. So if we look long term, having said politics will determine and the ANC is going to remain important, let's just look at what the time schedule tells us. We've got local government elections at the end of 2026 or early 2027. Then we've got the election of the new ANC leadership in December of 2027, and that will be critical. At the moment, and from that, I think it will determine whether a center-left or a center-right coalition emerges, because we are in coalition territory. At the moment, any number of front-runners, well, the front-runner probably is the Deputy President, Paul Mashatile, but there's talk of any variety of others, such as Ronald Lamola, Senzo Mchunu, although maybe after the weekend, a little bit more problematic, the Minister of Electricity, Fikile, and of course, Patrice Motsepe. So who knows where this is going to end up. But that new ANC president will then probably take over as president of the country in February 2028. And then we have new national elections around May 2029. So I'm saying politics will determine, and what happens with the ANC is hugely important for the country. In the meanwhile, developments elsewhere will also change things. For example, in my view, if Helen Zille takes over Johannesburg, it probably will take Gauteng into the DA. And that would mean that the ANC has lost power and influence in all three provinces. So in the minute or a few minutes that are remaining, I'm just going to refer to what I think is the potential of a center-right government. Center-right is basically code for the ANC, DA, maybe Freedom Front and IFP, versus a center-left alliance. And this would emerge from what happens with the ANC presidential elections in December 2027. And that would basically be an ANC, EFF, MK kind of alliance. So South Africa, as we've all said, needs to grow much more rapidly than it has been able to grow recently. So let me show you, and I'm going to just share and go to our website and just show you what the differences are in the growth implications of a center-right or a growth alliance versus our current trajectory of a potential of a center-left alliance. So this would be South Africa's GDP, the size of the South African economy in 2017 constant dollars. This is from 1990. And then from about 2027, we have a scenario. This would be our current path or our forecast of what in practical terms we can term a center-left coalition, ANC, EFF, MK. And this is what is possible with a high growth alliance, which in practical terms is a center-right alliance. Still Depends where the ANC goes on this. So instead of an economy that is about $628 billion by 2043, it could get to about 628, it could get to almost $1 trillion US. Huge difference in the size of the South African economy. This is what happens probably in poverty in South Africa. In recent weeks, there's been considerable debate on the informal sector. South Africa's got a relatively small informal sector, and we simply have to allow that informal sector to expand, to absorb more South Africans, so that they are not that they are employed, even if it is an informal sector. This is from 2020 till 2043. It is the percent of the South African population that live below $6.85, which is the poverty line that the World Bank uses. So instead of 58% of South Africans living in extreme poverty by 2043, it would modestly go down. And the reason, of course, is we have such high levels of inequality in South Africa that even rapid growth means that poverty comes down very slowly. This is showing a line graph of GDP per capita that the Deputy Minister referred to in South Africa from 1990 till 2043. It shows South Africa, and it shows two scenarios, the current path and the high growth scenario, and it compares that with the average for upper middle income countries globally. This is the impact of COVID. This is the impact of the 2007-2008 financial crisis. And from about 2025 onwards, it is a forecast. But what it shows you is the extent to which South Africa is falling further and further behind the average for upper middle income countries globally. We are, as the Deputy Minister indicated, in a slow growth, a middle income trap. And we have created that trap. And it also shows what the difference would be in GDP per capita if we get all of South Africa's economic cylinders firing. We start, there is no longer an increase in the gap, but GDP per capita in South Africa starts to increase, and eventually over long time horizons starts to close the gap. So, Carol, to conclude, without having gone into lots of scenarios and lots of work that we've done, we are now in an era of permanent coalition politics. But as we all see, these are not yet mature relations. South Africa is struggling to come to terms with how to manage a coalition, but that coalition is there to stay. Constitutionally, it is either in which direction are we going to go? It's not that any party is likely in the next 20, 30 years to regain a majority. So we need a pro-growth political alliance beyond 2029. And the way I look at politics, that means somehow the GNU has got to last. It's going to be very difficult, and the key issue, the key moment will be what happens with the ANC's succession elections for the ANC presidency in December 2027. That will be critical. And around that is the question of who can mobilize the urban black vote. As I've tried to explain, is that the ANC and the DA are likely to vie for the status as the largest party after 2029, but they are going to probably need one another, particularly if you're looking for a stable pro-growth alliance. On the other hand, center-left politics, ANC, EFF, MK, will probably result in low growth prospects, and populism remains a threat to South Africa. And as we've seen, the global environment is volatile. While the state capture is alive and kicking, I mean, we can only see around the fights so that we've seen around that. So, Carol, I'm going to stop there. I try to not really go into the scenarios and provide a lot of detail and data. We've done extensive work on South Africa's long-term future, which people can go and read. But I've tried to step back and look at the political challenges that we face and how important politics is in shaping our future. So thanks very much for that.
Great, thank you, Jakkie. You know, I think that's absolutely right. You know, I think we all know what needs to be done. I mean, how many times have we discussed Busi and Wandile? How many times have we discussed what needs to be done? You know, what can be done in this sector? What can be done in that sector? But somehow we don't get to implement it. So we're going to move into the discussion now, and I want to just do a brief introduction of our next speakers. So Busi Mavuso, she is the head of business leadership South Africa. She's the voice of business. She's the voice of reason. She's the voice of courage. She's not afraid to make herself unpopular when there are things that need to be said to those in power, and we really admire and love Busi for that. Wandile Sihlobo, the most energetic, the most tireless agricultural economist probably in the world, who has actually put, South Africa's agricultural sector on the map in terms of the way policy thinking and the way that economists think about the economy. So really, I can't tell you, every day my inbox is filled with something new that Wandile has done. So unbelievably energetic. He's the chief economist of the Agricultural Business Chamber. So thank you, guys. Thank you for agreeing to be on the show, on the program. And let's start by, we've got a whole lot of lists here, okay? In terms of, what we could do, what South Africa should do. What's your single most important reform that you could do in the short term, let's say, starting with you, Busi, and in the long term? So short term and the long term reform, what's the actual priority? Where do we have to just pin that?
Oh my goodness, you have to limit it to one, Carol.
Okay.
So just one
I know. We won't hold you to that. It's the only one. You could do this one of the. Okay, right.
Absolutely. So I really think that in the short term, and thank you very much for the invitation to the ISS. In the short term, I have to say, amongst the few that I have in mind, which I think the current tariff reimposition and the need for us to probably maybe look at alternative markets is one, but I really think we have a powerful opportunity, Carol, with the municipal elections that are actually coming up next year, right? It is 2026, it is in the next 12 months. Carol, we can vote differently. Carol, we can choose different leaders. When I engage with this report, when I look at what has been put together, at the conclusion, it talks about the importance of having the right leadership, as some of the recommendations. It talks about the fact that the need, if we are going to achieve sustainable growth and reduce inequality, we must focus on competent leadership, on evidence-based policies and fostering a culture of accountability and inclusivity. And I really think that we often give our power away as the electorate in terms of putting the right people in power, right? I mean, look at Joburg, look at the decimation, look at the mess. So as long as we continue as the followership, we often think that the power is with the politics. We actually are wrong. We put them in power. We give them the mandate. We allow them, to do whatever it is that they're doing. So I really think that people can vote differently and we can actually take our power back and put leadership that is actually intent on really building the economy and changing things around. From a long-term perspective, I have to say that I think what the report suggests in terms of the infrastructure investment that is actually happening at the moment, that is absolutely powerful. It is powerful, Carol, because when you do the level of infrastructure investment that we're seeing at the moment, when you are ushering the reforms at the rate that we're actually seeing at the moment, you are actually then improving the trading environment within which business operates. And if the trading environment is improved, business confidence goes up. If business confidence goes up, investment comes in. If investment comes in, the economy grows at the right level. And if the economy grows at the right level, then, you deal with the stubbornly high levels of unemployment, even the informal economy that we're actually talking about, that is probably going to grow at a marginal rate, in the next 10 years, does have an opportunity to be boosted if the overall economy is actually performing. But while we continue at this subpar 1% GDP economic growth, in real terms, we actually don't have a chance as a country. So if I were to choose one, let's vote differently, and definitely let's be intent on the infrastructure investment and the reform agenda that we're on as a country.
Well, I mean, those are incredibly good choices. Thank you, Busi. You know, I didn't expect you to come up with a political solution because people generally tend to look at the economic solutions. But I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think that is the case. And if you know, people who are living in Joburg, lucky for me, I'm not. But yeah, I don't think it's an easy place to live, a good place to live. And yeah, you need to do something about your leaders. Wandile, what are your thoughts? I mean, is there something that you could identify and say, let's do it, let's do this one thing?
I think, Carol, Busi built nicely on Jackie's point of saying the solution lies on a political, and I think they've covered that
Yes.
path onto what could happen there. But what I would remind us on, Carol, is that, I mean, if you think back in 2012, at the time the National Development Plan comes out, we were talking about what needed to be done in order to increase the level of investments in South Africa. And the figure that many people talked about when they're thinking about the gross fixed capital formation or investments, they were talking about 30% that was targeted at the time.
Yeah.
And if you look at where that figure is today and the trend that we have been in a recent past, we are sitting somewhere between 13 and 14%, which then for me leads me to one thing to say, building up on Busi's point, and which I agree fully, as well as what the Deputy Minister and Jakkie was saying, we do need to boost the sentiment, both business as well as consumer confidence, in order to draw in that investments, which I think is crucial for us to begin to see the growth that we talk about. Because the sectorial reforms and what needs to happen in the South African economy, I mean, a number of the documents have actually spoken about that. You can go back to just before COVID to the Tito paper of 2019, which took a sectorial basis of what needed to be done. We were clear as a country about those interventions. The Treasury, where the Deputy Minister is sitting, was clear on that. Even the OV now, I still think that it is fairly clear on that path about that. So the conditions then for me of what I would sum up on, I would say, you know, the political stability is necessary. And this is where I think, Jakkie, I agree with you folks there at ISS in this report. Either that is on GNU or whatever form, but I would think for me, the durability of the GNU is the most important thing that we have to achieve as a country. The second aspect, I would say, a build up on the success that we are already seeing. I mean, the Deputy Minister spoke about, if it was Jakkie, the electricity reforms and the gains that we are making on that. And I would say continuing on that and getting on some of the interventions that are underway in the logistics and the Transnet is one part of that. And the key focus also would have to be on this issue of crime and corruption, because ultimately then we see it links to the point that you are saying about the local governance, because you see a lot of that problem arising in them. Either it's arising political or it's arising on how we need to iron up and improve that local governance structure. I would say that's something that also really weighs down on us. And I would lastly then close it again on the aspect of saying, ultimately, I mean, we are an export-oriented economy, a small open economy broadly. So how we deal diplomatically one way with the US right now is important, but also just generally on opening up as many trade agreements as possible as a country, because I do think from where I sit, we need to rethink the trade policy approach of South Africa in general. We have gone for a long period of time where many countries were more willing to accept our products. We were not really strong enough to getting on the bilateral agreements. And I think this time around, we need to know that there will be those trade-offs that needs to be made. And we need to relook our both economic diplomacy as well as a trade policy as to what we need to do to enhance on top of all of the domestic reforms that we have talked about. That for me, Carol, will be some of the high-level things that I would begin thinking about for the short and as well as the long-term view on this.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you about the GNU. Let's try and keep it going. Ashor, we're leaving that to you. Hopefully you're going to deliver. Just on this question, Wandile, don't go yet, because I want to ask you, This morning we woke up to the 30% tariff from the US. Is it a train smash for us? How bad is it? What's your feeling? And you've been beating this drum for years now to say, let's have bilaterals, let's diversify trade. And no one has really, really listened. So on that score, I mean, where are the opportunities? What should we be doing?
Carol, I would want for me to first just remind the South Africans of the fact that, I mean, our engagement with the US has always been running on a couple of problems. Because we have been enjoying a unilateral arrangement with them.
Right.
You think back in 2014, when we were renewing AGOA, there was a lot of issues at the time. Either it was a pork issue, poultry matters, but friction was already building up. There was also the thinking at the time that we were an upper income middle country. Perhaps maybe we're supposed to have graduated out of AGOA. But of course, we can't just negotiate outside of the SACU region that we are in. So we have to have consideration of the bloc and where the economies of these countries that we are in. You fast forward from there, there were intellectual property bill issues. There were Lady R situation. Either you believe or you don't believe on what happened, but the perception is there. It matters not. There are Middle East politics, but the point is that there's a lot of friction that was already on the build up on the way. What that for me that sent at the time was that we could have perhaps maybe moved equally as Kenya was moving, where they started looking at the bilateral agreement with the US. But we couldn't do that fast enough while we were still having the SACU nations holding a slightly different view with where South Africa was sitting. But we are here now anyway, and most of them are facing way more higher tariffs than we face. I think the long-term and medium-term approach for South Africa still has to go back to thinking about how do we find a bilateral trade agreement with the US, because then that shields us to a certain extent on a number of these problems that I was highlighting. But for the near term, though, the current moment is quite uncertain, and it will be costly as to how do we navigate then the access for the near term while knowing where we are going, which is the bilateral trade agreement at some point. The cost will differ depending on where you are sitting in a business. From where we sit in the agricultural sector, I mean, the US is important. It's, yes, 4% of our overall exports, but that's still $500 million US. And it's important for the Western Cape, for Mpumalanga and KZN. This is where a number of our exporting industries are sitting. And we hope then that there will be a much more improved offering that South Africa government working with business and Busi's colleagues that we can be able to put forward. But lastly, very quickly, Carol, on this, I'm not dragging this point, I do think that the bilateral trade agreement that we need to seek with the US needs not to be the end of it. We have to explore also other avenues, not as a replacement of the US, but as an addition. To say you are sitting in a BRICS, we just concluded now a 3-day summit, but the BRICS doesn't have any serious economic ambition that is behind that, of saying, have we come up with a form of a trade agreement, or what are we doing? What's the clear form of that? We need to think about those things. And of course, looking in the Middle East and the other areas for diversifying our exports. And that will serve each industry differently. But I do think that those are considerations we must have for the long term. Thanks.
Yeah. Ashor, are you able to come in on that? I mean, what's your feeling about what is the sense in government around the impact of these tariffs, and what the impact is going to be?
Yeah, so I think generally the scale of fragmentation, not just what we're seeing in the US, but more broadly, is beginning to bite. And I think we can see that there are challenges, and you've mentioned agriculture and so on, but beyond that, and with pending reforms to AGOA, potentially a completely new system and so on, it is going to bite. It's going to bite very, very hard. And I think for a very long time, because South Africa occupied a very special place in the world politically, there was a presumption that the world would continue to see us that way, and that world no longer exists. We are a small middle-income open economy. We are policy takers in the global economy, not policy makers, and we have got to work around that. And so some of the things we've got to do is look at, for example, I think it was the 2015 Protection of Investment Act that prioritized multilateral endeavors over bilateral endeavors. And now we're moving back into a world where bilateralism is everything. And so a lot of reform needs to happen there. Obviously, that is firmly in the space of the DTIC. But if you were to ask me where we could make the most difference right now, it is in going back to and revising that act and understanding that we need the flexibility, particularly on maximizing bilateral relationships, because that is what we're heading to. And as I said, we don't get to choose the world we want to have. We've got to work around the world that's presented to us. And we need to acknowledge where we are. So I think that sort of thinking I'm beginning to see with my colleagues in government and so on is beginning to step in, and reality is dawning on everybody. And that's why you see a lot more pragmatic responses to these things rather than ideological when they do happen, which is only a good thing.
Right. No, that's a very useful contribution. Thanks. I think a lot of us probably weren't aware of that law, but so that's at least a practical thing that we can do. I mean, Brucey, you've been, business has been very involved in trying to sort of smooth over relationships with the US and so on. And I actually just think that was useful, Wandile, that you put in context. Actually, they've had grievances with us and our trade issues for a long time. So that was useful. And we kind of were a bit complacent because of AGOA, and we didn't actually address them. Brucey, I mean, from business's side, I mean, what's your reaction to the tariff announcement and what can be done, what should be done?
Absolutely do share Wandile's and the Deputy Minister's sentiments. I think we often, especially in the public domain, we actually downplay the significance and we trivialize the importance of what the economic impact of this is going to be. It is actually going to have a serious economic impact, especially when you look at the fact that we're already an economy that is struggling. We already have so many challenges. We already have such high levels of unemployment and so forth and so forth. So I don't think we can actually downplay, the significance of what this is actually going to mean. US is a crucial trade partner for South Africa. In 2023 alone, we exported about approximately 2.2% of South Africa's GDP to the US. The trade supported about 426,000 jobs in South Africa, as of the fourth quarter of 2023. And that just highlights the importance of our economic relationship. There's approximately 600 US companies that operate in South Africa, many of which utilize the country as a base for broader regional operations. And the total stock of the US investment in South Africa is obviously valued at about 137 billion rands, which still underscores the importance of this economic relationship. So I think that is what is at stake here. It's very interesting, Carol, without naming the company, this was already at the beginning of the year. I don't know if that has actually changed and actually has shifted ever since. They were told that they cannot use, I think they had US visitors here in South Africa, and they wanted to put up these US visitors, obviously a US-based company in South Africa. They wanted to put them up in a particular institution in South Africa, hotel and whatever the case is. And they already are restricted, in terms of which companies they can actually utilize and they can actually be seen to be in bed with. Look at what's happening, with the MTN Iran. The letter is in the public domain where Congress actually wrote, to the Bank of New York saying that we are worried about your sponsorship of MTN Iran. That is in the public domain at the moment. That is the kind of pressure that we're actually going to continue to see on South African companies, on US companies operating in the US in terms of what they can and cannot do. DEI, has actually been rendered useless, in the US. What does that mean for the 600 US companies that are actually operating in South Africa? Do they continue to observe it? The issue of the impact of climate change which is big on our agenda, to the US companies operating here all of a sudden. So this can actually go in a whole lot of different directions. This is dangerous for us, Carol, because the targeted, efforts and focus on South Africa is actually intentional. It is strategic. It is very deliberate, so we seriously, are under siege as a country. And I think we're really going to have to try and find ways of how we actually navigate this. And we're going to have to continue engaging with our US counterparts. We have to find a resolution. We don't have the latitude of walking away and trivializing the importance of this relationship.
No, we don't. And we've been left, they've left us with very little information, saying that they're now changing their whole approach. They're going to have a new template, but not giving us a template so that we could put something on the table before the 9th of July, 8th of July. Anyway, as you say, we've got to move on and do what we can. I mean, in terms of sort of the big picture, I mean, what we really need is to get growth going. And that would be the change. But I mean, we've kind of been unlucky with all of these shocks. But that said, businesses put an enormous amount of effort into assisting government now with the logistics crisis and the electricity crisis and so on. But we're still not seeing the needle moving. The needle hasn't moved on growth, and it's been quite disappointing. Why is that? Are the structural reforms, are they too slow? When are we going to get some sort of payoff from that? If you could come in on that, Busi and Ashor.
Yeah. Deputy Minister, do you want to go first?
I'll let you go first, ladies first.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's interesting. We actually had this conversation with Minister Paprakash. I think it must have been at the beginning of the year, talking about the work that we're doing in terms of trying to fix Transnet, and what that is actually going to mean, for the institution, for the economy. And a very pertinent question was asked, which said, what are we doing to ensure that the business that Transnet has lost, the business, Carol, that has gone to Namibia, that has gone to Mauritius, that has gone to Mozambique? Very interestingly, I actually spoke to one of the CEOs who run one of those companies who are now actually exporting and importing from Namibia. And they're actually saying, we have found that it's actually cheaper to actually operate from Namibia, So it's actually interesting. We are doing all of this work with the hope, that things are actually going to automatically go back to normal. Investment moves on, capital moves on, clients move on. You can imagine, the kind of investment, the long-term agreements that a whole lot of these companies have actually made, with these ports, for instance, with these countries, because this is at the core of their operations. When Transnet gets their house in order, do they all of a sudden, renege on those contractual agreements because all of a sudden we've actually decided to wake up? I think that is the risk that we probably might not have factored in as a country. I think the Deputy Minister puts it well. I think we have been in this privileged position for so long as a country, and we continue to think that we are a special case. We are not anymore. We are sitting in an environment where there is serious, tight competition. But I really think that the reform work that we're actually undertaking is actually going to be critical, and we have to be intent on doing that. We have to continue to ensure, that our environment is a conducive trading environment. Again, with the current tariff reimposition, with Africa being the continent that is actually going to be growing at a bigger rate than all the other continents, in the world, with us going to be having 2.4 billion people in 2050, we are the market of the future. So what is it that we're doing as South Africa, especially with our privileged position, being the most resilient economy in the continent, being the most diversified, being the most technologically advanced, being the most, the biggest, at the moment, and so forth. And what are we doing to actually ensure, that we can actually claim that position when investment, starts knocking at our doors, as it were? When Japan, when South Korea, when Thailand, all of these countries are the countries whose tariffs have been reimposed, just like us yesterday. They're going to look at different markets. So they have to see South Africa, as a worthwhile investment destination. But economic growth, Carol, is also a lag indicator. It's not a lead indicator. So I think we are naive to think that we're doing all of this work and we're immediately going to see results. It actually is going to come, but it's actually going to take time. We just need to be intent on it. So yeah, we are on the right track. We need to continue staying on this track. I'm very excited about a whole lot of ministers that are in this government of national unity. Their commitment to the government of national, to the reform agenda, the work that they've done, the visions that they've articulated. Minister Dean McPherson speaks about, the construction book of 250, a billion rands, if I'm not mistaken, worth of projects, or 250 projects at 268 billion worth of those projects. We need to actually ensure that when capital knocks, G20, we're hosting G20 this year. We're going to be having all of these prime ministers, presidents, ministers descending, in South Africa at the end of the year. We need to show that we're a jurisdiction that matters. We need to show that we're a market that has a lot to offer. We need to show that we're a country that is heading in the right direction. And reforms is the one fundamental and sustainable way of actually showing that.
Yeah. So we've got those reforms, we've got that reform program. It is slow. Minister Sarupen, Deputy Minister Sarupen, would you like to come in now on the issue? Why is the needle not moving on growth, and when will it move?
So I think that if we take a view of the last 20 years of government policymaking, take the long view, the South African state has put the cart before the horse, because we come up with complicated master plans and sectoral plans and so on, and you mentioned big sectors and so on. But there are lots of horizontally applicable things in the economy that matter that haven't been given enough attention. And the base of building an economy and getting growth is actually safety, security, and the rule of law. Under state capture, the rule of law broke down. And then, of course, safety and security has always been an issue. Nobody is going to come and invest and put capital into a country, particularly fixed capital, if that's going to be stripped for scrap metal and so on. And so that base level of our economic pyramid, if you will, is not in place. And then once you've done that, once you've fixed safety, security, and the rule of law, and of course we do have some positives there. We've got constitutionally entrenched judicial review and so on, but that doesn't function. We must be honest about that. And until you get that fixed, the rest of the measures you make and competitiveness don't work. So until you get that fixed, growth will continue to suffer. Once you've done that, you've got the base level of economic infrastructure, your network industries largely. Our communications infrastructure works because it's largely run by the private sector and it's run fairly well. But then you look at the rest of our network industries. Energy is largely a state-owned monopoly. Transnet, as BCC rightly pointed out, is a state-owned monopoly that's failed us as well. And so getting that sorted and fixed, and we should have been on this reform agenda that we are now 10, 12 years ago, anticipating these single points of failure in the economy. The Electricity Regulation Act does foresee a future competitive energy market. But the question we now need to confront, why is it not moving quickly enough? You can have the act, but if you've got a single market player that has 86% share, which Eskom does, you're never going to have a competitive market. And so you've got to take measures, not just to put it into place on paper, but also in reality. And that's where the blockages sit in growth as well. So if we can sort out those two things, the things that affect every single business. If you can make every South African business more competitive, more able to reach markets, and more able to export and to secure their asset base, suddenly you would get growth without having to start a single new firm. And
or have a new master plan.
Yes, exactly. And all those things are addressing much higher parts of the economic pyramid when the foundations are quite shaky. And so they will never achieve results until you resolve the foundations. That's my analysis of why we're not getting growth.
That is really a great way of looking at it, and really, really helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Ashor. I mean, Jakkie, I don't know if you want to come in here with anything, because, I mean, apart from your futures work, you are a security expert. And I do agree that, the fact that you haven't got anyone enforcing the rules, the rules can't be enforced, just the basic rules, like, can I hold on to my property when I invest in South Africa? Can I hold on to my property when I park my car here? If those sorts of things are not possible, yeah, we're not going to go anywhere. How does that feature in your scenarios? And maybe give us a little bit from your experience, what has gone so badly wrong?
Carol, thanks very much. You know, we have lost the rule of law in South Africa. It is as simple as that. Nobody believes what the reforms that are happening. At the start of my talk, I gave a list of positives and negatives. And we have a criminal justice system, a security establishment, which is corrupt, which is incompetent, which has literally not come to the table. And particularly if you look at the various commissions of inquiry over decades that have looked at the police, that have looked at intelligence and so on and so forth, none of their recommendations have been implemented. We keep on stumbling along in terms of the one challenge to the next until the police commissioner of KwaZulu-Natal stands up and says, but, you know, I mean, this is crazy stuff. I don't think, for example, that that much of the intelligence community can be fixed in the normal way. You need to bring in somebody who is going to clean it out and fix it from the bottom up. Take policing. Policing is not rocket science. It's fixing the basics. It is devolving some authority and powers, changing a mushroom structure, which has got lots of brigadiers and generals at the top, and pushing the responsibility down, privatizing, outsourcing some of the functions, forensics and so on and so on. It can all be done. What is missing is a growth mindset. We do not have a government. Now that has changed to a degree with the government of national unity. We see ministers competing. We see changes with Creasy and with infrastructure, energy, and so on. There is real movement. But what is lacking is a growth mindset, that what is more important than anything else in South Africa is growing the economy. But we keep talking, and unfortunately the ANC particularly keeps talking about redistribution. Yes, we need to take the proceedings of our growth and redistribute, but you need to grow before you do that. So then just one other remark, you know, the points that have been made about South Africa unlocking trade into South Africa. Well, our biggest market is into Africa, and that's really where our future lies, both in infrastructure, in agriculture, and so on. It's also our most important, the only area where we can really compete with China. I think that there's a lot of attention that is being placed to that, but it all comes down to politics. It all comes down to leadership and a mindset that is focused laser-like on getting the economy to growth and taking all the opportunities or the inhibitors to their growth out of the way.
I think that, I mean, a lot of people have pointed this out, but, you know, we all do commit to growth. As we were saying, Ashor, we all have the political will, it seems. We all talk about it a lot. But it's the tendency, of South African tendency, is to say, yes, we'll have growth, but we must also have this, and we must also have this, and we must also have this, and the state should be able to get everything, should pay for, you know, 3 times the price, just so that new people can come into business, and those sorts of additional requirements that we're always loading onto growth is often what is holding us back. And yeah, it's not helping. I think we all got a really big shock this week with Mkhwanazi's revelations. I think they were terrifying, because I think for once we actually have, you know, a fairly good police minister who actually had a bit of a strategic plan, unlike his predecessor. So that's a bit of a blow, but hopefully it will lead to some sort of real thoroughgoing investigation. I do agree with you, Jakkie, that you can't reform the police intelligence or the national intelligence unless you shut them down. I actually do think they need to be closed down. They're rotten. Right, now we're just about to get onto our chat, and there are lots of questions, but maybe just one thing that we could sort of move on, because I'm sure it's going to come up in the questions, is that question of the political will. Have we got what it takes? So we can talk about what we need, all of these, you know, what we need in terms of moving the needle on growth, but have we really got what it takes? Have we got that commitment, that sort of single-minded commitment to growth. I mean, what's your view, Wandile?
Carol, on the political will, that's a tough one. But I think the Deputy Minister Busi will have a bit to say about that. But the one thing I want to say is that look, the reforms and much of what had happened, the payoff of that, yes, the points that have been made, I accept that, but I do think that there will be a time lag before we start to see some of these things showing up on the growth figures. And secondly, the most important thing that I think we need to work on, in addition to the crime matters that the Deputy Minister was speaking about, is for me the local government. Because at the end of the day, the economy and the business and all of those things happen at a local level. We can talk in Pretoria, set up the strategies and do all of those things. But if I have to set up a factory and do that, I will work on that in Lichtenburg, in a town. If that town doesn't function, and then all things grind to the stop. I do think that cleaning up the local municipalities, making sure that there's professionalization of civil servant at that level is something that we have to do. And linking then to your point about the political will or not, I do think, I don't know this, we'll say how this could be done, or how do you get the professionalization of a civil servant to the extent that you insulate them from the political dynamics. Because if we all accept then that we are getting on a GNU environment for the long term, looking at where Jakkie was pointing us to, we can accept then that the political dimensions, as this GNU evolves and matures, they will have volatility every now and then. But you want to allow those political formation and maturity to happen, while at the same time, the civil servants maintain on their professional work. As to how we achieve then that level of professionalization is something that I think we have to begin to thinking about. And I do think it has to start also within the local, the municipality level, at the local level. And I would say those reforms needs to be tied up with the point, Deputy Minister, you were talking about cleaning up and making sure that the rule of law. Those are things that I think we need to reflect deeply on as a country as well, in addition to the points that have been made. Thanks.
Yeah, yes, that is one of the questions in the chat about, you know, the civil service, and how do we get to a situation where career bureaucrats are selected on their skill and then are held accountable for what they do. And I do think that there are some attempts there in the pipeline. You know, there's this professionalization of the civil service, there are various other things, but I think that we're not really seeing accountability. Are we, Jakkie?
No, we are not. I think, controversial as this is, at the heart of that problem is the way we have implemented Black economic empowerment. Instead of enabling and empowering people through education and unlocking growth, we're trying to fix the problem at the end, instead of fixing the problem where it should be. I'm a white South African. Not, you know, this is a difficult issue to address, but I really think we are fixing things the wrong way around. So that's one thing. The other matter that I posted about now in the chat function that I think in the short term is very important is independence and of the NPA and the appointment of a successor to Shamila Batory. I think it's critical. The NPA is not independent. It is dependent on the Department of Justice for every appointment and decision. And it is literally one of the few, with all its mistakes and all the challenges, it's one of the bulwarks that stands against state capture. So many things that have to be done, police reform, but these things can be done. Look at how Revenue Services has turned around. With the right leadership, we can we can change our murder rate. We can make South Africa a much safer place, but it requires political will. And I must say that the current minister, who is now under threat, seems to be pointing in the right direction. Who knows what's going to happen after this weekend's pronouncements and revelations around KwaZulu-Natal and the murder squads. But these things can be fixed. But that's, in a sense, why I spoke about politics in my presentation. It's all firstly about politically what's going to happen. And the question really to Deputy Minister Sarupen is, how do we get the GNU to stick and to mobilize and to get a growth coalition going in South Africa? Because politically, I don't see any other option than working within the major parties that are within the government of national unity. And there doesn't seem to be any chemistry or anything like that. How do we maintain that GNU into and beyond 2029?
So I'm going to let anyone come in on that. I won't just put Deputy Minister Sarupen on the line. But anyone who wants to, I mean, yeah, how do we hold the GNU together? Because we've seen, in fact, if you look at the relationships between the two main parties, the ANC and the DA, I'd say, you know, well, publicly, certainly, those relationships have deteriorated. And rather than one would have thought, well, they've got used to each other working together for the last year, but that doesn't seem to have happened. How do we hold it together? Ashor?
Yeah, I think that what's important is that, you know, I remember I'm not a member of the ANC.
Yes.
So I will express my viewpoint from the fact that I'm not a member of the ANC and take it from whence it comes. But the GNU cannot be reduced to a holding pattern because the majority party believes that the electorate made a mistake in the last election, and if they knew that this was going to happen, they wouldn't have voted that way. And that mindset needs to change for the GNU to work. That there needs to be an acceptance that this government was elected by electing a president through parliament on the votes of multiple political parties, and that the confidence in the president and cabinet, and the executive, including myself, is as a consequence of that, which in turn is as a consequence of the will of the voters. And so it cannot be treated as a holding pattern until the next election. And if the GNU is to be stable, then there's got to be that. Now, relationships do get frayed. I mean, and of course things do happen, but you know, with Minister Gonengwana and myself, we regularly have breakfasts and so on, and have thrashed things out and agree to disagree. And there are certain things I don't agree with at all in government. There's certain things he doesn't agree with me. And so we sort of find each other halfway or say this is not something we can proceed on. That's important. And it is something that needs to be built up. But it starts with the leadership at the very top, quite importantly. And it starts with political parties understanding that governing is not about putting your party interests first, or putting your country interests first. And until that mindset shift changes, I think it is going to continue to be tumultuous.
Yeah, any other thoughts? Wandile, thoughts on the GNU?
No, I think the deputy minister summed it well nicely about putting the interests of South Africa first. Yeah. I mean, Carol, you and Busi may remember this in some of the exchanges, even before the formation of the GNU, when people were looking at the ANC policies, DA policies. There was a lot more that was in agreement when people were looking at those documents that were overlapping. Which then, Deputy Minister, to your point, that if we put the interest of the country first, and then we go back to what really matters for all of us, we realize that we all want one thing. And I think that coexistence is something that can happen. And I do think that also, I mean, we are still in a new journey here. This is an evolving system. And I would hope that it matures well, however way that the politics lead going forward. But while we are still here, that insulation and professionalization of civil servants begins then to be so important, so that when there is friction, not everything grinds to the halt. We can still continue and be a functional country and deliver to what is expected for any country to do. Thanks.
Yeah, and I think that point that you made, Deputy Minister, around the GNU being a holding pattern, and you frequently get sentiments coming out of the ANC saying, well, you know, this is just a strategic setback, and people would, if we held an election tomorrow, people would vote differently. Well, I suspect, I would even put money on it, that we're going to see that not happening in the local government election, especially in Joburg, which I think is going to be pretty decisive. in terms of yeah, where we're going as a country, and the extent to whether people will change their vote or not. Questions, right? We have a question from somebody saying that the economy is too protected, having so many oligopolies in a key sector like banking. Eddie, are our banks too concentrated? Are they the problem? Are they not extending credit? Who wants to come in on that one? Maybe I'm going to get Busi to come in on that one.
So, Carol, the oligopolistic nature of our economy is not just in the banking industry, it's in the majority of the industry. I mean, you look at a lot of industries, you've got the big four, you've got the big five. But I think there is something to be said about also recognizing and appreciating the importance of having such big businesses and their ability to weather the storm, especially when we find ourselves, in this difficult economic climate, that we're actually operating in. You don't get a flourishing small business environment and informal sector without big businesses doing what it needs to do, right? Because I think it does actually provide, that environment. They've got the buying power, they can withstand, the economic volatility, they actually are operating on a different level than the. So I really think that there is something to be said, about actually recognizing the importance of big businesses. Yes, we do actually need to bring in more players into a whole lot of different sectors, and I think we have to find a way of actually how we usher that in. And I think that is actually ongoing work. We are already starting with the monopolies. You are seeing a lot of private sector participation that is actually going to be taking place, in as far as that is concerned. It does actually future-proof, our economy. Does mean that there are a whole lot more actors that can actually continue to deliver services if the one or two companies fail. So that is definitely, I think, the plan. The work that we're doing as a country is definitely to ensure, that we can actually usher that in. But I wouldn't really put the banking industry as a standout sector. It's work that we actually have to do overall in terms of reshaping our economy.
Right. Yeah. No, well, we are lucky that we have those big companies, but we are such a high. The barriers to entry are very, very high. And I mean, we tend to speak. A lot of us tend to speak quite negatively only, about BE. But one of the I think the big advantages or big successes or big useful levers that we should maybe use more is the supplier development and the enterprise development part of BEE, which is bringing new firms in, and I think that is really part of the key to growth. Okay, we have a question here for the minister, the deputy minister. What is the chance of the government to reintroduce tax incentives for businesses to employ more people, and also including incentives for them to be able to take part in the economy? So the issue of employment incentives, we do have a small tax employment incentive. But if you'd like to comment on that, and then where would that fit sort of in the sort of run of things, where you started to speak right at the very beginning about the importance of of debt sustainability and us reducing our debt and actually not having an enormous amount of money new money to spend.
Yeah. So I think the way to look at this is to think about the backdrop of the broad economy. Why are businesses not hiring in the absence of a tax incentive? The first is because after 17 years of load shedding, a lot of CapEx has been sucked into load shedding proofing businesses. So money that would have been spent on employment and expansion has been spent on basically securing your energy supply. And so even when load shedding is alleviated, you don't see employment growth. And so there are all these other barriers before you even get to the tax system that need to be alleviated. So even we do have the employment tax incentive to get young people into the system. It hasn't generated the kind of results that we would have wanted over the last, now it's been since 2013, I think, and it hasn't produced the kind of results because the baseline for the economy is not there. And so job growth isn't there. The other thing is that a tax incentive on its own probably won't achieve what we wanted to achieve, because we've got to get to a point where the overall tax system is competitive with our peers and our competitor economies. Our tax to GDP ratio is 27%. The OECD average is 17.7%. The African average is around 14%. And even when you look at our neighboring countries, I think Eswatini's slash their corporate income tax rate under 20%. Namibia is at 24.5. We're at 27. And there's a lot of pressure from other political parties to raise the corporate income tax rate in South Africa. So if you're going to free up working capital, you've got to stabilize energy supply and logistics and so on, so that they can expand, and expansion leads to job growth. And so the tax system has got to actually just not be about hire someone and we'll give you money back, but we need to give you money back so that you can grow your business and then hire people. And again, I'm not a fan of putting the cart before the horse. Always understand how things work systemically. And so we've got to work on that tax to GDP ratio. Again, it's a consequence of 15 years of low growth.
Wandile, what about agriculture? I mean, doesn't that provide us with some opportunities, some employment opportunities out of expansion?
I mean, look, the sector has expanded over time, and I think the employment conditions in agriculture have also remained fairly stable. I mean, we more than twice from where we were in 1994, and I know that in these friction between the US and South Africa, some people tend to over-exaggerate the issues of farmers as if there are horrible things happening, but this is a sector that has actually done reasonably well. And where that growth of more than double since 1994 has come about is perhaps maybe on two things. One, it's a level of investments that the private sector has made on technology, better genetics, high-yielding seed cultivars, irrigation infrastructure, pack houses, all of these which help on creating work and keeping the rural South Africa quite vibrant. And the second lever is the one that we started with, which is the exports. I mean, the sector export more than half of its produce in value terms. So that assists. But I think the more hopeful thing going forward is the fact that it's not at capacity. I've said on many occasions that today there's still about 2.5 million hectares of land that is sitting in the state hands. It was previously fully productive land bought from white farmers between 2006 and 2019. So that's the area that can still be expanded, which then will require extra capital to put it in. But the point is that it can deliver new jobs, it can deliver extra inch of growth in rural South Africa. So there's all of that potential and the capacity that is there. But again, then central to your point, which is similar to what you have posed to the Deputy Minister, any reforms that ease up capital on that would help in that path. But ultimately, where all of this, especially on a sectoral basis, or still comes back to, is to whether you've dealt with crime, rural crime, stock theft, basic things like that. Because then that, while we think it negatively affects large businesses, it actually affects more medium and small black businesses that can't have to deal with all of this rural crime. And then it washes them out. While if you are a large scale, it will be costly. You can't expand, similar to the electricity point you are making, Minister. They spend then that money on security in this time around. But I do think that it really, this is at the crux of it. And then after that, it's your roads, it's your municipalities, it's the governance, and just doing the basics right. And that unlocks this. And I think in turn then, it really begins to help the small and the new entries to this point. Because just a quick last point here, Carol, you made a point to Busi asking about the oligopolistic nature of our economy on banks and everywhere. But I do think that the points we have been discussing here all along are the ones that present enormous cost to new entrants and the small businesses in here, because they make the operating environment in South Africa quite difficult. The bigger ones that are already there, they are able to insulate. So if we want to help and make the small and the medium and informal businesses to operate better, then let's solve the basics. And I think that's how we will get by. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a really strong conclusion coming through out of this morning's session, and grateful for Ashor for putting it on the agenda. So,
Carol, can I just add something to that? When we modeled 8 sectors in the South African economy and then compared their relative impact on growth. And we were pleasantly surprised by the positive potential within agriculture. South Africa is an upper middle income country, and the largest growth potential comes from manufacturing, as one would expect. Also free trade into Africa, and of course better governance, as the Deputy Minister mentioned. But agriculture has got lots of potential. The main problem and challenge, of course, eventually is how do you move from communal land tenure into private and to freehold title, and that is a political challenge that we will face. But that's really where the great potential lies, in addition to what Wandile has mentioned.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to throw another one to you, Jakkie. Given this sort of directly to the points you were making right at the beginning around the politics is what is going to change us. Given South Africa's voting apathy, realistically, what do you think are the chances of change? I mean, the trend we've been watching in elections has been that people stay home.
Yeah, and people are opting out of the system. They're looking at their own interests, and there's a sense of defeatism and negativity in South Africa that we need to change. And that needs to come through political mobilization, through leadership. And that's really the critical issue. It will come through determined leadership that can turn South Africa around. And it always comes back to that single issue. We all throw stones at Donald Trump, and he's a remarkably despicable man in my view, but he shows leadership that is quite amazing. And whenever you travel across the continent, I was in Abuja a week or two ago, we launched a big study on the future of Nigeria, and there's the same challenges. I mean, they're even more negative about their country than most South Africans. But the demand, the need for leadership that puts their country first and acts, and that's where we have South Africa's got all the ingredients for success, all of them. What we need is leadership. We need to hold people accountable, and we need to demonstrate that we will hold people to account. Our solution to everything is a commission of inquiry and wait 6 months or a year or 5 years before we do anything. There is nothing in South Africa that we haven't researched and know what are the problems. We just need to implement them. But yeah, that's why I started and I finished my intervention really not on the scenarios that we've modeled, the sectoral scenarios, which levers would we pull, but starting with the heart of the problem. And the heart of the problem is basically political leadership, and it's within the ANC. It's the dominant party. It has been the dominant party. That needs to change. It's going to probably remain the dominant party in South Africa beyond 2029, meaning it could be the largest. It's not a given. It may not be may not be in government. There is a chance that the ANC can be ousted, but then we need a growth alliance to put together. And that really is the challenge that we face. And I can't emphasize this more enough. Leadership can change South Africa, and that's where we have to find a way of unlocking that, whether it's through elections and our electoral behavior, as Busi says, whatever the case is. But and there are green shoots, make no mistake. A lot has changed the last year or two. But these things, as Ashor has been saying, take time to weave their way through the system. And growth and turning South Africa around will take time, but it is possible. I think maybe one thing that we need to also just in that relationship sort out is the relationship between the National Dialogue and the National Planning Commission. We need a vision. We need to decide where we want to go and then implement that. And I think that there is a complete mismatch. Sorry, somebody was trying to come in.
Yeah, no, Busi was going to come in. I'm going to ask everyone just to give their concluding comments now as well. So Busi, yeah, please do come in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I just wanted to dovetail on the point that Jakkie was actually making, and as far as political leadership is concerned, it reminds me of what one of the greatest Pan-Africanist, leaders that we actually have in the continent always says, that, the political hygiene is the problem that we actually have, not just the South Africa, but the African continent. He makes this analogy, that if you continue to elect a clown in the hope that he's going to become a king, what that clown does is he converts the entire kingdom into a circus. And he says that is part of the African problem. It all starts with political hygiene. He says Africa is suffering not because we don't have democracies. We've got gagistocracies. And a gagistocracy is a country or a state that is governed by the West, governed by its least suitable, governed by the least competent of its citizens. So unless and until we actually are very deliberate about who we put in power, we'll continue having these conversations that actually take us nowhere.
Yeah. Wandile, concluding comments, please.
Yeah, Carol, and then again to Jakkie and the colleagues that I thank you so very much for bringing us in here. I would conclude by saying, look, I agree. We have studied the South African economy for many years. We have an idea of what needs to be done. And I would think, for me, a number of plans will still not move fast enough if the sequencing of the intervention is not well thought out. And I would say on the sequencing of it, the security, corruption, crime aspect is very important. That gets to be on a leading path. And I would overlay that with the work that needs to be done at a much more practical level, the municipal part, because that is where people exist, that is where small businesses and everything else exist. And lastly, I would say we need to think thoroughly about the trade policy aspect. We have existed in a world that was sympathetic to South Africa and wanting to welcome us to the world. But this time around, we need to a much more robust trade approach where we are going out to the world aware that there will be trade-offs that we make, but select which regions we go to and ensure that regional trade agreements and bilateral trade agreements become the theme of the day. That for me will be some of the things to really put on the table. Thank you.
Deputy Minister, concluding comments?
Yeah, I think there are lots of takeaways from this conversation, but the simple overarching takeaway is that we need to accept our place in the world and the economy we have, and then with singular focus, pursue and prioritize the goals that will get us to the kind of country we want. And I think you made the point earlier, Carol, that I just want to re-emphasize, that when South Africa and South Africans want things, government must do this, government must do that, we never pick the priorities and say, if we hone in on these 5 or 6 things and pursue them with vigor, we will get results. And that's part of the challenge as to why we don't get the kind of results that we're looking for. And if we reduce our expectations and demands to the things that, the levers that'll get us growth, that'll get people into jobs and get us out of stagnation and the low growth trap, which is where I started, then I think we can go a long way and make a lot more progress than we have right now. Thanks.
Good. Jakkie, yes, you're the last man.
Thanks, thanks, Carol. I think that Minister Sarupen put his finger on the key issue. What are our critical challenges that we should focus on? Not everything is a priority. We need to decide on those 3 or 4 things and pursue them, and leadership in that issue is critical. We've done a lot of work on looking at South Africa's long-term future under what we refer to as a current path, and a combined scenario where we model the impact of 8 sectors on South Africa's growth prospects. And at the end, we come with a laundry list of what needs to be done and what can give the most growth impact: manufacturing versus free trade versus investments in education and health. And there's a lot to read there, but it all comes down to the political will to make that happen. And then I want to make the point that I think it's very important, I referred to it a bit earlier, that South Africa, despite all the analysis, the discussions that we've had about plans and the lack of implementation, we do need a new national development plan that sets out clearly what are our problems and then what needs to happen. And the national dialogue needs to fit into that, and we need to harmonize those processes. This need not be a massive 700 million rand process. This can be done. I think the way that Trevor Manuel did it with the National Development Plan in 2012 is an example of how to proceed. But we need to set the country on a direction and clarity, and then we need to get down and do it. And we know what needs to be done. We just need to do it.
Yeah.
Thanks very much, Carol.
Thank you. I really have found the discussion really interesting and actually quite inspiring. I mean, I think we've seen, so many suggestions and good, thorough kind of inputs on where we could go, what we could do, and what the priorities are. So I've really enjoyed it. And so thank you everybody for joining. Thank you to the ISS. Thank you to the Hans Seidel Foundation, the European Union, the Open Society Foundations, and the governments of Denmark, Ireland, the Netherlands, Norway, and Sweden. I believe those must be the people who are paying Jakkie. And thank you everybody for joining us. I hope you'll join us again soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks, Carol.